Before Anna Kepner ever stepped onto the cruise ship, there were signs that something in her family history wasn't quite right. Years of instability, repeated separations, and concerns that were never fully addressed. She also had a stepbrother she reportedly felt uneasy around, according to people close to her. On the final night, the ship's cameras recorded two teens entering the cabin, and no one coming out until the next morning. Hours later, Anna was found under the bed, covered with a blanket and life jackets, a discovery that raised more questions than answers. Soon after, her online obituary was edited. Her stepmother chose to exercise her Fifth Amendment rights in a separate legal matter. And her biological mother only learned about her daughter's passing through a search on Google. What happened on that ship may have begun years earlier. In a home filled with warning signs that were never fully understood. All persons are presumed innocent until proven guilty. Early warning signs. In 2007, in the quiet coastal region of Brevard County, Florida, a baby girl named Anna Kepner entered the world at a time when her family was beginning a new chapter. Her father, Christopher Kepner, and her biological mother, Heather Wright, were a young couple who shared the same hopes many parents do: a stable home, a healthy child, and a future they believed they could build together. At that point, no one could have predicted how the choices and transitions in the adults' lives would shape Anna's journey in the years that followed. Anna's earliest days unfolded against the backdrop of a small community, where people often knew each other by name and believed children would naturally grow within that sense of connection. Yet the marriage between Christopher and Heather did not last, and their separation created a significant shift in the family's structure. After the breakup, Heather relocated to Oklahoma, while Anna remained in Florida with her father. From that moment on, her childhood took a new direction, one marked by growing up without her biological mother's daily presence. The absence of regular contact did not mean Anna was unloved. Instead, it reflected the challenges many families face when trying to reorganize responsibilities after a separation. For a young child, these transitions can open questions about belonging, emotional stability, and how relationships evolve over distance. Anna stayed connected with her mother through birthday calls, holiday messages, and occasional visits, but the physical separation still shaped her sense of identity during her formative years. From an educational and developmental perspective, Anna's early life highlights the importance of emotional consistency within family environments. Children who experience multiple changes in their household structure, even without exposure to any harmful behaviors, may still find it difficult to maintain steady routines, trust, and a clear understanding of their support system. These factors do not lead to any direct conclusions about what would later happen in Anna's life, but they form essential context when examining the broader story. Understanding Anna's beginnings is crucial, not to assign blame, but to recognize how family transitions influence young people. Her story reminds us why support networks, communication, and stability matter deeply in a child's emotional development. These early dynamics would later intersect with new family members, new environments, and new challenges, shaping the backdrop for the events that unfolded years later. In 2008, when Anna was barely a year and a half old, a legal event appeared in the family's records and later became an important marker for understanding the complex dynamics that unfolded over the next 2 decades. A woman named Christina Donahue filed a petition seeking a protective order involving a minor in her household. The individual referenced in the petition was Christopher, Anna's father. A hearing was held shortly afterward, and the petition was ultimately dismissed. Court documents did not determine any wrongdoing, and no further action was taken. Nevertheless, the existence of the filing itself stands out today, not because of its legal outcome, but because of how it connects to later events in the family's story. One detail that would later draw significant attention is the role of Christina's daughter, Tabitha Donahue. At the time of the filing, Tabitha was a teenager of about 15, and she occasionally helped care for Anna and her younger sibling. What seemed like a small overlap between two families in a tight community eventually became a major turning point years later. Tabitha became Christopher's second wife and the primary maternal figure who raised Anna from early childhood until her mid-teen years. This early connection, the dismissed petition, the established relationship between the two families, and Tabitha's position as a caregiver, does not imply any conclusions about later events. However, It forms part of the broader map needed to understand how different relationships and decisions intersected throughout Anna's life. From an investigative and social development perspective, early details like these may appear minor at first, but they often become relevant when reconstructing a full timeline. The situation also highlights a broader lesson about communities with long-standing personal ties. In smaller towns, where families often know each other across years and through multiple life changes, early interactions can evolve into deeper, more complex connections over time. When households experience separation, remarriage, or the blending of new family units, past relationships, even something as simple as a teenager babysitting for neighbors, may resurface later in unexpected ways. The 2008 filing is not a key to determining what would eventually happen in Anna's story, nor does it point to any specific cause. But it is a necessary piece of the overall background, a reminder that family histories are often shaped by a series of small, interconnected events that gradually build the environment in which a child grows. When the marriage between Christopher and Heather ended, Anna's life entered a new chapter shaped by the arrival of Tabitha Donahue. Once a young babysitter who occasionally helped the family, Tabitha soon became Christopher's second wife. She was still in her late teens at the beginning of this relationship, and suddenly found herself stepping into a role many adults adjust to, becoming a full-time caregiver to two growing children, including young Anna. For the next 13 years, Tabitha functioned as the person who oversaw the daily rhythms of Anna's childhood. She attended school events, took her to cheer practice, helped with homework, and provided the structure that children often rely on after a major family transition. For a child growing up at a distance from her biological mother, the consistency of a caregiver can make a critical psychological difference. In Anna's case, Tabitha became the person who guided her through early routines, taught her responsibility, and encouraged her interests, especially in sports and performing arts. While the outward structure of the household appeared stable, the atmosphere inside the home sometimes reflected tension. Marital strain, financial pressure, and the complexity of blended family dynamics occasionally created emotional distance and conflict. Even so, people who knew Anna consistently described her as cheerful, independent, and full of energy. She was the kind of student who smiled at strangers, remained committed to her schoolwork, and carried a sense of optimism despite the shifting circumstances around her. These qualities, resilience, humor, and self-motivation, became defining parts of her personality. From an educational and developmental perspective, Tabitha's presence played an undeniably significant role in shaping Anna's character. Research on childhood development shows that during periods of family restructuring, children often rely heavily on the stability provided by a consistent caregiver, whether that person is a biological parent or not. Emotional availability, routine, and encouragement are key factors that support a child's sense of security and identity. Although the years Anna spent with Tabitha do not explain everything that occurred later in her life, they form a crucial layer of the larger narrative. They help explain where Anna learned her independence, her warmth, and her strong work ethic. They also highlight how children in blended families often adapt, grow, and find their own sources of strength even in complicated environments. Anna's resilience during these years is one of the reasons her story resonated so deeply with friends, classmates, and the broader community, a young woman who continued to shine despite the many changes around her. The year 2023 marked a significant turning point in Anna's family structure, as the long-standing marriage between Christopher and Tabitha, who had raised Anna for more than a decade, came to an end. The divorce filings submitted to the Brevard County Court did more than formalize the separation. They also revealed details that raised questions about the emotional climate within the household during the years leading up to it. In her petition, Tabitha requested that the court impose supervised visitation between Christopher and their children. This is a measure typically considered only when a parent or guardian expresses concern about the level of stability or safety during direct interactions. More notably, the court documents included language referencing a history of physical and mental mistreatment toward minor children. Although the filings did not provide a public breakdown of individual incidents, standard practice in family court due to confidentiality, the wording suggests that the concerns were not isolated or recent. Instead, they pointed toward a pattern that may have developed over several years. with tensions accumulating quietly within the household. These details imply a home environment that oscillated between routine daily life and underlying conflict that was never fully resolved. From an educational and developmental standpoint, such descriptions underscore the importance of recognizing how long-term family strain can affect children as they grow. Research consistently shows that young people exposed to prolonged instability, whether through frequent arguments, emotional distance, or changes in caregiving arrangements, often develop coping mechanisms early. Some become highly independent and resilient, while others may experience anxiety, emotional withdrawal, or heightened sensitivity to stress. In Anna's case, teachers and friends described her as upbeat, independent, and energetic. However, resilience in adolescence sometimes reflects the need to adapt to shifting circumstances rather than the absence of difficulty. The 2023 divorce initiated a period of major readjustment, new living arrangements, new household roles, and the emotional impact of breaking into two separate units. These transitional phases are often the most challenging for teenagers, who may already be balancing academic pressures, social development, and emerging adulthood. While the divorce filings do not offer concrete conclusions, they do provide important context. They form part of the broader background needed to understand the environment in which Anna came of age, an environment shaped by both care and conflict, by supportive moments as well as unresolved tension. These details help illustrate how family dynamics can be layered and complex, influencing a young person's experience in ways that only become fully visible when viewed in hindsight. When investigators and child development experts review cases involving teenagers, they often look back at the environment in which those young people were raised. This is not to place blame on the past, but to understand what factors may have shaped the circumstances leading up to an event. In Anna's situation, her childhood was marked by multiple transitions, divorce, remarriage, and the blending of new family units. These experiences are not unusual, but when they occur repeatedly over many years, they can create emotional strain or heightened sensitivity in children navigating those changes. From a psychological perspective, young people rely heavily on consistency to build emotional stability. When routines, caregivers, or family structures shift, children often develop coping strategies earlier than expected. In Anna's case, the independence, cheerfulness, and high energy that friends and teachers frequently mentioned may reflect not only her natural personality, but also her ability to adapt to an environment that changed several times throughout her life. Her resilience highlights an impressive strength, even as it underscores the number of adjustments she had to make growing up. Another important factor is the role of adults within the household. When a family goes through extended periods of tension or restructuring, adults are responsible for guiding healthy communication, maintaining boundaries, and providing emotional safety for the children involved. If adult relationships are strained or unstable, young people may absorb those dynamics and develop their own ways of managing conflict or stress. These effects are not limited to one child. They can influence the emotional development of siblings and step-siblings living under the same roof. This leads to a key investigative consideration: whether long-term household instability may have influenced the behavior of other teenagers in the home. Research shows that adolescence is a period where impulse, identity, and emotional regulation are still developing. When teens grow up without consistent models of communication, conflict resolution, or emotional support, the risk of behavioral problems can increase. It does not mean that every teenager in such an environment will struggle, but it does show why investigators examine family context carefully. Reflecting on Anna's childhood is not an attempt to predict or assign responsibility. Instead, it provides crucial context for understanding the environment that shaped everyone in the household, including the young people who later became central to the investigation. In many cases, the environment itself becomes an essential piece of understanding how events unfolded. New jigsaw. After his second divorce, Christopher entered a new chapter of his life when he began a relationship, and eventually a marriage, with Chantel Hudson. This was his third marriage, and for a family already adjusting to multiple transitions, the arrival of a new stepmother meant another major shift in daily life. Chantel brought 2 children from her previous marriage, Tinth, 16 years old, and a daughter around 8. Her oldest child, approximately 18, was already living independently. The merging of these two households created a large, multi-layered family structure where several individuals of different ages, backgrounds, and emotional histories were suddenly living under one roof. Both sides of the blended family carried histories of legal disputes and past conflict. Chantel's earlier court filings, related to custody adjustments, referenced significant disagreements within her previous marriage. Meanwhile, Christopher had gone through a divorce that also included concerns about family dynamics and household stability. Although these documents do not offer definitive conclusions, they do illustrate that each adult in this newly formed home had previously experienced difficult transitions, unresolved tension, or long-standing disputes. From a family psychology perspective, when two households with prior conflict are brought together, young people are often the ones who absorb the most change. Children must adapt to new rules, new authority figures, and new relationships with step-siblings who may have entirely different personalities and life experiences. Anna and her younger brother Connor entered this reshaped home, while still processing the emotional impact of their father's recent separation from Tabitha, the caregiver who had raised them for most of their lives. On the other side, T.H., entering late adolescence, was navigating one of the most emotionally sensitive stages of development. Blended families can thrive when supported by consistent communication, clear expectations, and emotionally attentive adults. However, when the environment lacks stability, or when previous conflicts are not fully resolved, small disagreements can escalate, and misunderstandings may accumulate unnoticed. This is why, in investigative work, the shared household environment is often examined closely. Patterns of stress, inconsistency, or lack of cohesion can influence adolescent behavior in ways that may not be immediately visible, but become significant when viewed in retrospect. This context does not imply causation, but it forms an essential layer for understanding how each member of the home experienced daily life. It also helps illustrate why the family dynamic is considered relevant as investigators reconstruct the full picture leading up to the events on the cruise. Parallel to the formation of Christopher's new household, another conflict was unfolding: the prolonged custody battle between Chantel Hudson and her former husband, Thomas Hudson. This was not a simple post-divorce disagreement, but a multi-year legal struggle filled with filings that included allegations of inappropriate behavior within the home, disputes over decision-making, and claims of interference with scheduled visitation. Both sides submitted statements aimed at supporting their own parental concerns, illustrating a strained co-parenting relationship that had been under pressure for a long time. In court documents, Chantel described challenges in enforcing visitation schedules and referenced past household tensions. On the other side, Thomas's family alleged that Chantel had restricted his parenting time and had not fully cooperated in matters involving the children. The back-and-forth nature of these filings paints a picture of a family system already burdened by unresolved conflict long before Anna entered their lives. What makes this custody battle crucial to the current investigation is the unexpected detail found in one of the most recent filings. Chantel's attorney requested a postponement of a hearing because one of her minor children might become involved in a separate federal investigation, the very incident aboard the cruise ship. This filing, although unrelated to the original custody issues, provided the first public indication that a teenager in the household could be connected to the case. It unintentionally offered a rare window into the stressors and emotional environment surrounding the family before the incident occurred. From an investigative perspective, understanding this long-standing legal conflict helps outline the psychological and environmental pressures experienced by the young people in the home. Extended disputes between adults, inconsistent routines, and unclear boundaries can all contribute to heightened stress for adolescents. While such factors do not determine outcomes, they are relevant when examining how a teenager may respond to conflict, frustration, or emotional strain. This custody battle, therefore, becomes more than a legal matter. It becomes a contextual key to understanding the broader environment in which the events on the cruise unfolded. When examining the environment surrounding this case, the psychological development of T.H., a 16-year-old entering a newly blended household, becomes an important part of the broader context. Adolescence is already a period marked by emotional sensitivity, identity formation, and fluctuating social dynamics. For a teenager, joining a new family structure, especially one shaped by past conflict, ongoing legal disputes, and major changes in routines, can heighten stress and create feelings of uncertainty. TH entered this new environment at a delicate developmental stage. He had to adjust to a new stepfamily, new siblings, and new expectations, all while navigating the emotional residue of his parents' disputes. Research in adolescent psychology consistently shows that teens exposed to shifting households, inconsistent rules, or unresolved tensions between adults may struggle to find a stable sense of belonging. This does not predetermine behavior, but it does increase vulnerability to emotional imbalance, impulsive reactions, or difficulty managing stress. Beyond environmental influences, adolescence is also shaped by biological factors. At 16, the brain regions responsible for judgment, emotional regulation, and impulse control are still developing. When combined with external pressures, such as changes in living arrangements, tension among adults, or expectations within a new family, these biological realities can create a complex psychological landscape. This does not imply fault or label any individual. Rather, it highlights why investigators and child development experts often evaluate environmental and emotional conditions when examining cases involving teenagers. Understanding what a young person was experiencing internally and externally helps provide context, not conclusions. In TH's situation, the intersection of biology and circumstance, adolescent development combined with family instability, relocation, and long-term conflict, represents a meaningful piece of the larger picture. These factors help explain why professionals emphasize the importance of emotional support, consistent guidance, and structured environments for teens in blended families. While TH experiences do not provide definitive answers, they form an essential component in understanding the broader context surrounding the events that followed. When Anna and TH entered the same household, they were only 2 years apart, Anna at 18 and TH at 16. This narrow age gap is important to acknowledge, not because it suggests anything definitive, but because it naturally creates a different type of dynamic than the one typically seen between step-siblings with larger age differences. Both were in late adolescence, both were navigating personal identity, and both were adjusting to a newly blended family structure that formed quickly and carried its own history of conflict. Another key factor is that they were not biologically related, yet were suddenly living in close proximity, sharing common spaces, and learning new boundaries without the gradual transition that many blended families experience. Family counselors often emphasize that when step-siblings enter a shared home during their teen years, adults must establish clear expectations regarding privacy, personal boundaries, and respectful interaction. Without those structures, the environment can become emotionally complicated for the young people involved. In this particular household, the rapid pace of change, new marriage, new siblings, ongoing legal disputes, and a recent relocation may have made it difficult for everyone to define those boundaries early on. When teens of similar ages live together without a long history of familiarity, it is not unusual for feelings such as admiration, competition, discomfort, or jealousy to emerge. These reactions are not inherently harmful, but they require guidance from adults to ensure that the environment remains healthy and stable. From an investigative and psychological perspective, the dynamic between Anna and TH is relevant not because it suggests wrongdoing, but because it helps explain the emotional backdrop of the household. A blended family with close-age teenagers, unclear boundaries, and long-standing tensions among adults can create a setting where misunderstandings or emotional pressure escalate more easily. Understanding this dynamic allows investigators, psychologists, and educators to place the events in context. A young woman at the brink of adulthood, a teenage boy undergoing significant developmental changes, and a home still finding its balance after years of transition. One of the most discussed elements in the months before the incident is a report from Anna's former boyfriend, who described an unsettling moment during a FaceTime call. According to his account, while Anna was resting, TH reportedly climbed onto her or moved very closely toward her as she slept. The boyfriend later shared that Anna appeared uncomfortable and startled, and that she later expressed anxiety about sleeping at home. She allegedly told him that certain interactions in the household made her uneasy. Importantly, the former boyfriend stated that he notified Anna's family about what he witnessed, though it remains unclear how the adults responded or whether any follow-up conversations occurred. From an investigative perspective, this type of report holds value not because it proves anything about later events, but because it acts as an early behavioral indicator within a complex family environment. Adolescents may sometimes engage in boundary testing behavior, especially in blended households where relationships are still forming and emotional roles are unclear. When young people express fear, discomfort, or changes in their sleeping habits, mental health professionals often view these as markers worth closer attention. A key question arises: why were these concerns not evaluated more thoroughly in 2024? There are several possible explanations. Families undergoing major transitions may overlook subtle signs of conflict. Teenagers sometimes downplay or normalize uncomfortable situations. Adults may misinterpret behavior as typical adolescent tension rather than a potential red flag. And in blended families, it can be difficult to distinguish between ordinary sibling disagreement and something that requires intervention. Examining this report now is not about placing blame retroactively. Instead, it highlights the importance of listening closely to young people when they express fear or discomfort. Early communication, clear boundaries, and prompt evaluation by adults can prevent misunderstandings from escalating and ensure that every young person in a shared household feels safe and supported. Across many reviewed cases, psychologists note a recurring risk pattern. A teenage boy entering a blended family and living closely with a step-sibling of similar age without clear boundaries. During adolescence, emotions intensify, identity is still forming, and impulse control is developing. When added to family transitions, conflict, or inconsistent supervision, these conditions can lead to misunderstandings, unhealthy attachment, or jealousy. This does not imply conclusions in the current case, but it underscores a vital lesson: teens in blended families need strong guidance, defined personal boundaries, and attentive communication to ensure emotional safety for everyone involved. Darkness enveloped the cruise ship. When Christopher planned the family cruise, many people close to the situation described it as an attempt to reset the household after years of transition, tension, and reshuffling of relationships. For blended families, shared trips are often used as a symbolic fresh start, a chance for everyone to bond outside the pressures of daily life and to create new memories that might help replace old conflicts. The idea is understandable. Remove the family from their normal environment, place them in a setting filled with activities and structure, and hope that the change of scenery encourages connection. Yet psychologists note that blended families often carry invisible layers beneath the surface. Each member brings personal history, experiences unspoken emotions. Parents may hope for harmony, while teens may feel pressure to adapt, fit in, or act as if everything is perfectly balanced. These internal dynamics do not disappear simply because the setting changes. Sometimes, close quarters on a trip can even magnify them. Seen through an investigative lens, the cruise becomes more than a vacation. It is a moment where existing family tensions, unspoken boundaries, and emotional dynamics traveled with them. Understanding the purpose of this trip helps contextualize the events that unfolded later and highlights how blended families often navigate both hope and complexity at the same time. The night of November 6 became a critical point in the timeline. According to family accounts, Anna attended dinner with the group but mentioned she was not feeling well. Those present recalled that she seemed quieter than usual, describing a sense of fatigue rather than any obvious medical issue. After dinner, while the rest of the family continued with the ship's evening activities, Anna chose to return to the cabin early. This decision, though not unusual for someone feeling tired, later became an essential detail in reconstructing her final movements. On cruise ships, CCTV coverage plays a major role in understanding passenger activity. Investigators reviewing the footage noted Anna walking through the corridors after leaving the dining area. The recordings reportedly captured her moving at a normal pace, showing no visible distress, and returning toward the cabin she shared with her siblings and step-sibling. The time-stamped images provide one of the last verified moments of her being seen alive. These visual details, posture, walking speed, direction, help investigators narrow down the window in which key events occurred. What makes this portion of the timeline especially important is that it marks the moment when Anna separated from the rest of the group. From this point onward, the investigation depends heavily on digital evidence, cabin access data, and surveillance footage. In many cases involving cruise ships, the transition from public spaces to private cabins becomes the most difficult segment to reconstruct. because the environment changes from monitored hallways to rooms with limited visibility. Understanding Anna's final walk back to the cabin allows investigators to establish a baseline. She was alert, she moved on her own, and she reached the room at a specific time. These are foundational facts used to evaluate every event that followed, ensuring that the investigation remains grounded in evidence rather than speculation. Cabin 8237 is a central focus of the investigation because it represents the boundary between what the cameras could confirm and what happened beyond their view. According to surveillance footage reviewed by investigators, Th. was seen entering the cabin after Anna returned. The footage does not show him exiting afterward, creating a fixed reference point in the timeline. This detail does not imply conclusions, but it establishes that he remained inside the room during the critical window in which investigators believe key events occurred. The same footage reportedly captured the 8-year-old sibling moving in and out of the cabin, which helped narrow down the time frame even further. Her presence in the hallway indicates moments when the room was not fully occupied by all family members, giving investigators additional markers for when certain interactions could or could not have taken place. Each of these movements helps build a clearer chronology based strictly on neutral, observable evidence. Notably, several reports emphasize that there were no audible signs of disturbance coming from cabin 8237. Cruise ships have close quarters, and loud arguments or sudden commotion are often heard by nearby passengers. However, in this case, no neighboring guests reported disruptive noise. For investigators, this detail raises the possibility of a quiet, internal interaction rather than an event that produced obvious sound. Professionals often refer to this as a silent struggle scenario. Not a conclusion, but a descriptive term used in cases where no loud vocalization or commotion is detected despite a significant incident occurring. Because no cameras were positioned inside the cabin, what happened beyond the doorway must be pieced together from digital records, interviews, physical evidence, and timeline analysis. Cabin 8237 is, therefore, the transition point in the investigation, the last place where technology could confirm movements, and the first place where unanswered questions begin to grow. Between approximately 2300 on November 6 and 11:17 a.m. on November 7 lies an 11-hour span that investigators refer to as the blackout window. This period is significant because it marks the time during which Anna was last confirmed alive and the point at which the housekeeper later discovered her inside cabin 8237. With no cameras inside the room and limited audio detection from nearby cabins, investigators rely on a combination of timeline reconstruction, forensic evidence, and behavioral analysis to understand what may have occurred during these hours. One scenario under review is the possibility of mechanical asphyxiation, a term used in early reporting based on unofficial descriptions of preliminary medical findings. This phrase is broad and does not specify a single mechanism. In general investigative contexts, it may refer to pressure applied to the neck, chest compression, or obstruction of airflow. Forensic specialists emphasize that the exact cause can only be confirmed through an official autopsy, which has not yet been publicly released. However, the early information guides investigators to examine whether physical contact, restraint, or a sudden escalation of tension could have contributed to the outcome. Another possibility examined by behavioral experts involves a boundary conflict that escalated into a struggle. Reports from people Anna suggested she had expressed discomfort with interactions involving Th. in the months prior. In cases where boundaries between teens and blended families are unclear, conflicts may arise unexpectedly. This does not assign intent or blame to any individual. Instead, it highlights a developmental reality. Adolescents can respond impulsively, emotionally, or unpredictably when confronted with rejection, embarrassment, or rapidly changing circumstances. A third scenario sometimes considered in youth-involved cases is a sudden emotional outburst. Teenagers may experience intense reactions triggered by stress, jealousy, or perceived interpersonal conflict. Child development specialists consistently note that the frontal lobe, the region responsible for self-control and rational decision-making, is still developing at age 16, which can influence reactions during high-stress moments. Finally, there is the possibility of an accident, though investigators often view this as a lower probability scenario when certain post-incident actions appear intentional or organized. If elements of the scene suggest that the situation was managed or arranged after the fact, investigators typically analyze whether the response with accidental behavior or indicates an attempt to cope with panic or confusion. The blackout window remains one of the most important segments of the timeline. It represents the point where definitive evidence ends and careful, methodical reconstruction begins, a task requiring forensic discipline, patience, and adherence to factual analysis rather than assumption. In many cruise ship investigations, the cabin becomes the most important location to analyze, because it is the final controlled environment in which verified movements and physical evidence converge. In Anna's case, cabin 8237 is especially significant for several reasons. First, cruise ship cabins are known for having thin walls and limited sound insulation. Passengers often report hearing footsteps, conversations, or even televisions from neighboring rooms. Because of this, investigators pay close attention when a serious incident occurs without anyone nearby reporting clear sounds of distress. The absence of audible disturbance does not confirm what happened, but it suggests that if a struggle occurred, it may have been quiet, contained, or brief, which aligns with what forensic specialists sometimes call a silent confrontation, an event that does not produce sharp noise or prolonged commotion. Second, there were no signs of forced entry, according to early reports. Cruise cabins lock automatically, and any attempt to break in typically leaves marks or triggers door sensor data. When a cabin shows no damage, investigators focus on individuals who had legitimate access or were already inside. This does not determine responsibility, instead it narrows the scope of analysis by removing the possibility of an unknown outsider entering undetected. Third, surveillance footage showed a notable pattern. TH was recorded entering the cabin, but was not seen leaving during the key timeframe. This detail is not a conclusion in itself, but it becomes significant when placed alongside the lack of other confirmed entries or exits. When investigators build a timeline, they rely on fixed reference points: who walked in, who walked out, and when. The cabin becomes the intersection of these data points. If someone remains inside for an extended period during a critical window, that individual naturally becomes central to the reconstruction process. Additionally, the fact that the 8-year-old sibling moved in and out of the cabin gives investigators secondary timestamps that help define when the room was fully occupied versus when only certain individuals were present. Each small movement helps create a more accurate picture of the sequence of events. In essence, cabin 8237 is not important because of any single detail, but because it is the location where the digital timeline, physical evidence, and behavioral context all converge. Investigators rely on this controlled space to guide their questions, eliminate unlikely scenarios, and better understand the hours leading up to the discovery of Anna. The cabin is therefore not just a place, it is the structural anchor of the investigation. At approximately 11:17 a.m., the housekeeper assigned to cabin 8237 entered the room as part of routine morning service. Her statement later became one of the most critical reference points in the investigation. According to reporting, she discovered Anna positioned beneath the bed, wrapped in a blanket, with additional items placed on top. The exact positioning and condition of the remains were documented carefully and forwarded to investigators, as these details are essential in determining both the time of death and the sequence of events that followed. Her report is significant, not only because she found Anna, but because her description anchors the timeline to a precise moment supported by independent testimony. When medical examiners evaluate a possible time of death, they consider multiple factors, including body temperature, stiffness, lividity, and the environment in which the remains was found. Cruise cabins maintain stable air conditioning, which can slightly affect the rate at which physiological changes occur. Nonetheless, early ME evaluations suggested that Anna had been deceased for several hours by the time the housekeeper entered. While the official report has not yet been publicly released, this preliminary timeframe allows investigators to narrow the blackout window to a more manageable period. The reported level of rigidity, combined with the condition of the surrounding environment, indicates that the event likely occurred sometime during the night or early morning. This analysis does not assign responsibility, but it helps investigators align physical evidence with digital timestamps such as CCTV movements, door lock logs, and the movements of other family members. What makes the 11:17 a.m. discovery especially significant is that it establishes the latest possible endpoint of the incident. Because Anna was confirmed alive when she walked back to the cabin the evening before, and confirmed deceased by mid-morning, investigators can focus on the specific hours in between. With cabin entries visible on CCTV and sibling movements recorded, the ME's estimated timeframe allows investigators to cross-reference each person's location, eliminating scenarios that no longer fit within the refined timeline. The housekeeper's actions also provided crucial procedural integrity. By immediately notifying security, she ensured that the scene remained largely undisturbed until authorities arrived, preserving important forensic details. In many investigations, the time and manner in which a remains is discovered can influence the accuracy of medical findings. In this case, the prompt report at 11:17 a.m. forms one of the strongest factual anchors in an otherwise limited environment, helping investigators reconstruct the final hours with greater precision. Obituary corrected. One of the most heartbreaking elements of this case is the experience of Heather Wright, Anna's biological mother. When recounting how she learned of her daughter's passing, Heather described something almost unimaginable for any parentee. She did not receive a call, a message, or even a brief notification from anyone in the family or from authorities. Instead, she discovered the news the same way a stranger might, by typing search terms into Google after hearing vague secondhand comments that something might have happened on a cruise ship. According to re-interviews, Heather had been trying repeatedly to contact Anna when she stopped responding. She attempted to call, she sent messages, and she reached out through social media. When none of these attempts were answered, Heather realized that she had no reliable source of information and no one she could contact directly for clarity. In a moment of fear and desperation, she turned to her computer and searched for phrases related to an 18-year-old girl on a cruise. It was then that Anna's photo appeared in numerous news articles, confirming what no mother should ever have to learn in such a way. For investigators, Heather's experience highlights the communication breakdown inside the family, especially during a crisis. In many cases, when a young adult dies unexpectedly, authorities or close relatives provide immediate notification to parents or guardians. The absence of such contact does not indicate wrongdoing, but it raises questions about the dynamics within the household and the degree of connection or conflict that may have existed before the incident. Heather later explained that she still had not received a direct message from Anna's father at the time she gave her interviews. She described feeling isolated, unprepared, and deeply confused, forced to process life-altering news without support from the people closest to the situation. This emotional distance becomes relevant not from a legal perspective, but from a family systems perspective, where communication patterns often help contextualize larger tensions that may shape household behavior. Her story also serves as a powerful reminder of the human impact behind investigative timelines and forensic discussions. Behind the surveillance footage, the cabin analysis, and the digital evidence lies a mother who learned of her daughter's death, not from a phone call, but from a search engine, an experience that underscores the need for compassion, clear communication, and responsible handling of information in any tragedy involving young people. When Heather informed Christopher that she intended to Florida to attend their daughter's memorial, his reported response, warning that she would be arrested for unpaid child support if she entered the state, drew significant attention from observers and investigators. While this statement does not indicate guilt or wrongdoing, it raises important questions about avoidance, emotional distance, and conflict management within the family dynamic. In high-stress situations, some individuals respond by withdrawing or deflecting confrontation, especially if long-standing disputes exist. Family behavior specialists note that such reactions can stem from fear of conflict, shame, unresolved resentment, or a desire to maintain control during a volatile moment. From an investigative standpoint, the significance is not legal but behavioral. When a parent chooses administrative threats over compassion or cooperation following the loss of a child, it suggests an emotional disconnect that may help explain broader communication issues within the household. Understanding this pattern provides context, not conclusions, as investigators examine how each family member responded during a period of crisis. When Anna's obituary was first published online, it reportedly included the names of several key individuals in her life: her biological mother Heather, her second mother figure Tabitha, and the stepbrother who had been living in the same cabin during the cruise. But within days, readers noticed that multiple names had been quietly removed. Tabitha, the woman who raised Anna for more than a decade, disappeared from the list entirely. Even more notably, the stepbrother's name was removed as well. For many observers, these edits raised an important question: why remove someone's name at all, unless there is a reason to distance the narrative? Obituary revisions are not uncommon, but in family systems analysis, sudden removal of names can reflect tension, conflict, or a desire to simplify a narrative that has become emotionally or legally complicated. In Anna's case, investigators and behavioral experts view these changes not as evidence of wrongdoing, but as indicators of internal family dynamics. Each removal tells a story: who is being acknowledged, who is being excluded, and how the family wishes the public to perceive their structure during a period of intense scrutiny. The first removal, Tabitha's name, is particularly striking because she played a major role in Anna's upbringing. She served as the consistent caregiver from Anna's childhood through her mid-teens, attending school events, facilitating activities, and providing day-to-day guidance. Removing her from the obituary may signal unresolved conflict from the recent divorce, emotional distance within the household, or an attempt to avoid drawing attention to sensitive past events that could resurface in public discussion. Child development researchers note that when long-term caregivers are erased from memorial acknowledgments, it often reflects deeper relational fractures rather than mere formatting decisions. The second removal, the stepbrother's name, raises a different set of questions. From a neutral investigative standpoint, this change could reflect a desire to reduce attention on minors, especially during an ongoing federal inquiry. Families sometimes choose to limit exposure of children associated with difficult situations, particularly when public speculation is high. However, the timing of the removal, coinciding with early reports suggesting that investigators were reviewing the stepbrother's timeline, led many observers to interpret the edit as an attempt to restrict connections that might invite further questions. While these obituary edits do not prove anything about the events on the ship, they serve as subtle markers of how the family navigated the public narrative. They highlight emotional divisions, signal protective impulses, and reveal the complexity of relationships that shaped Anna's life. In investigative storytelling, such changes matter because they eliminate the human dimension behind the timelines, evidence, and official reports, reminding us that every detail, even a quiet edit, has context worth examining. During a recent custody-related hearing, Chantel reportedly invoked her Fifth Amendment right, choosing not to answer questions that might place her at risk of self-incrimination or unintended legal entanglement. In U.S. law, this right does not imply guilt. Instead, it acts as a protective measure, allowing individuals to remain silent when a situation is complex, emotionally charged, or connected to an ongoing federal investigation. Legal experts often emphasize that invoking the Fifth is a strategic decision, not an admission of wrongdoing. What drew attention in this case is that Chantel reportedly declined to answer any questions during the hearing. For investigators and court observers, her silence becomes a procedural detail rather than a clue. When a family is under intense public scrutiny and a minor is potentially connected to an active case, attorneys commonly advise parents to avoid statements that could later be misinterpreted or taken out of context. This is especially true when timelines, digital evidence, or communication patterns are still being reviewed. From an investigative perspective, Chantel's decision underscores how interconnected the family's legal situations have become. Her silence does not indicate involvement, instead, it reflects caution. In high-stakes environments, individuals often rely on constitutional rights to avoid influencing parallel investigations, protecting both themselves and the minors under their care. After the incident, reports indicate that TH was moved to an undisclosed relative's home, where he has remained out of public view. This relocation has raised questions among observers, but from an investigative and legal standpoint, there are multiple possible explanations. When a minor is connected to an active federal inquiry, whether as a witness, a person needing support, or someone under review, families and attorneys often choose to limit exposure to the public. This is both a safety measure and a way to prevent emotional overwhelm during a highly scrutinized event. Keeping the location private can also serve to protect the minor from online speculation, media pressure, or unwanted attention. In many sensitive cases involving teenagers, privacy is not only recommended, but essential for maintaining mental stability while investigators work through the facts. However, the same action can also appear, to some members of the public, as avoidance. When a minor is removed quickly and kept at an undisclosed location, people may question whether the goal is to shield them from external stress or to prevent further inquiry. Behavioral specialists note that it is common for families to take protective steps in uncertain situations, even when no formal accusation has been made. Ultimately, the relocation itself does not define intent. It reflects the intersection of legal caution, emotional protection, and the complex dynamics surrounding a developing investigation. The unknown. As the investigation continues, several key questions remain unresolved, forming the core of what many observers refer to as undiscovered details of the case. These unanswered elements are not accusations, nor do they point toward any single conclusion. Instead, they represent the areas where investigators must rely on evidence that has not yet been made public or evidence still undergoing analysis. The first and most central missing piece is the official cause of death. Early reporting referenced preliminary indicators of mechanical asphyxiation, but the medical examiner has not released a complete report, full toxicology results, or a final statement confirming the mechanism or timing. Without this information, it is impossible to determine whether the event was sudden, prolonged, accidental, or the result of escalating conflict. The ME's official findings will ultimately define the medical foundation of the timeline. Another unresolved element is the absence of a statement from TH. According to publicly available information, he has not provided a recorded account of what occurred inside the cabin during the 11-hour window. In investigations involving minors, silence can have many interpretations: attorney guidance, emotional overwhelm, fear, confusion, or simply the lack of readiness to speak about a traumatic event. The meaning of his silence cannot be assumed, but it remains significant because it limits the available narrative to physical evidence and secondary witness accounts. The role of the adults on the night of November 6 also remains unclear. Investigators have not fully disclosed where each adult was during the late evening hours, what interactions occurred beforehand, or whether anyone checked on the teens after they returned to the cabin. Understanding adult supervision that night, or the absence of it, is essential for evaluating household dynamics and the level of support available during the hours leading to the discovery of Anna's remains. The younger child's perspective is another delicate but important unknown. At approximately 8 years old, the child moved in and out of the cabin during the night. Developmentally, children at this age may misunderstand what they see, may not recognize danger, or may struggle to communicate their observations clearly. Investigators must rely on child-appropriate interviewing methods to avoid suggestion or misinterpretation. Whether the child saw, heard, or sensed anything unusual remains undisclosed. Finally, the question of motive, if any, remains entirely open. Investigators often examine emotional triggers when adolescents are involved in sudden, high-stress situations. Possibilities explored in general case analysis include jealousy, rejection, fixation, emotional escalation, or an accident that spiraled out of control. Each scenario requires evidence-based support. None can be assumed without the ME report, the physical findings, digital records, and possibly a statement from TH. At this stage, the case consists of partial facts, incomplete medical information, and behavioral patterns requiring careful interpretation. What remains certain is that investigators must balance forensic evidence, adolescent psychology, and family dynamics to construct a truthful understanding of what happened. Until the medical findings are released and additional information becomes available, these unanswered questions remain at the center of the investigation, guiding the search for clarity, responsibility, and justice. When investigators step back from the individual moments of this case and examine the broader picture, a striking theme emerges. Many of the dynamics that may have influenced the events on the cruise did not begin in 2025. Instead, they are connected to more than 50 years of instability, conflict, and shifting family structures. Understanding this continuity is essential, not because it identifies a cause, but because it helps explain how a series of small, unresolved issues can accumulate and shape the emotional environment in which a tragedy occurs. The first linking factor is the long-standing instability within the family system. Since Anna's early childhood, her household experienced multiple major transitions, 3 marriages, multiple relocations, custody disputes, and ongoing tension between adults. Family behavior specialists consistently emphasize that chronic instability can affect how children and teenagers regulate emotions, develop trust, and respond to conflict. These patterns do not determine outcomes, but can influence how individuals interpret stress, disagreement, or rejection. A second connections the recurring cycle of accusations, distancing, and legal conflict. Each major chapter of the family's history includes elements of strain, allegations of harmful behavior, protective orders that were later dismissed, contested custody filings, and prolonged disputes between adults. These events demonstrate a pattern, often seen in high-conflict families, where emotional divides deepen over time and communication deteriorates. This backdrop helps contextualize why certain warning signs may not have been acted upon promptly, or why key conversations, such as concerns about teen behavior, may not have been followed through. Another common thread is the absence of clear boundaries within the blended family structure. When teens of similar age are brought together without gradual integration, family counselors note that adults must establish firm guidelines for privacy, interaction, and personal space. In this case, multiple transitions occurred in rapid succession: the end of one marriage, the beginning of another, the merging of children, and the relocation of households. Without stable routines or defined boundaries, misunderstandings and discomfort may escalate unnoticed. One of the most significant connecting factors is that early warnings raised in 2024 were not meaningfully addressed, according to public accounts. Anna's former boyfriend stated that she expressed fear about sleeping at home after a troubling incident involving TH. While the family may have viewed this as teenage conflict, the absence of documented follow-up suggests that opportunities for intervention may have been missed. In many cases involving adolescents, ignored warning signs become important in hindsight, not because they predict an outcome, but because they reveal a pattern of unresolved emotional tension. Finally, the shared cabin on the cruise, the physical environment where the timeline ultimately converged, reflects a culmination of these interconnected factors. Placing teens in close quarters without long-standing familiarity, especially after years of family instability, created a situation in which emotional stress, developmental pressures, and unclear boundaries intersected. The cabin did not cause the outcome, but it acted as the environment where years of unresolved issues came together at the most vulnerable moment. Taken together, these factors illustrate that the present cannot be separated from the past. The investigation requires not only forensic findings, but also an understanding of the long-term emotional landscape that shaped each person's behavior leading up to the tragedy. This broader view helps ensure that the search for truth is grounded in context, compassion, and evidence rather than assumption. One of the most persistent questions from the public, the media, and even those close to Anna is simple: why has the FBI said almost nothing? The case has generated nationwide attention, touched off emotional debates online, and raised concerns about family dynamics, supervision, and investigative transparency. Yet federal authorities have released only the bare minimum: that Anna's passing is under active investigation, that there is no ongoing threat to the public, and that no further details will be disclosed at this stage. While silence can feel unsettling, especially in a case involving an 18-year-old whose remains were discovered in circumstances that shocked the public, the FBI's refusal to comment is not unusual. In fact, this restraint is a protocol-based decision shaped by law, forensic procedure, and the complexity of cases involving minors. Understanding that silence requires examining four key factors: investigative protocol, the involvement of a juvenile subject, the pending medical examiner's full toxicology results, and the FBI's need to construct a clean, fully supported federal case before any charging decision is made. First, federal protocol strictly limits what investigators can release during an active inquiry. Unlike state-level agencies, whose communication styles vary region to region, the FBI follows a uniform national standard: protect the integrity of the investigation at all costs. Publicly naming theories, discussing forensic leads, or confirming speculative details could influence witnesses, alert potential subjects, or distort testimony. Silence is not avoidance, it is preservation. In a case like this, where timing, movement, and behavior inside a confined cabin are essential pieces of the narrative, the FBI cannot risk allowing outside information to shape recollections. Second, and perhaps more defining, is the involvement of a juvenile subject. According to court filings in an unrelated custody case, a 16-year-old step-sibling may be under investigation. When a minor becomes the focal point of a federal inquiry, additional secrecy is required. Juvenile rights, sealed records, and protections against prejudicial public exposure all come into play. Federal agencies must avoid releasing anything that could identify, endanger, or influence the legal trajectory of a minor, even if public pressure is intense. This means investigators cannot confirm the existence of a juvenile subject, cannot discuss potential evidence tied to that individual, and cannot comment on the direction of the inquiry. Third, investigators are awaiting the full medical examiner's findings, including complete toxicology. While early reporting suggested a form of mechanical asphyxiation may be involved, the official cause and manner of passing have not yet been released. Full toxicology can take weeks or even months, depending on the substances being screened and the workload of the laboratory. These results will determine whether there were any substances in Anna's system, whether there were signs of restraint or sudden collapse, and whether the timeline suggested by early findings aligns with the final forensic conclusions. Without this information, no responsible agency can move forward with a charging decision. Fourth, the FBI is known for building clean, airtight cases before bringing them to federal prosecutors. While state-level authorities sometimes charge first and investigate later, federal cases typically move in the opposite direction. Investigators gather all evidence, verify every lead, review surveillance, conduct digital forensics, interview witnesses, and compile a structured narrative before determining whether charges should be filed. And in this situation, federal jurisdiction is clear. The ship sailed under U.S. authority, returned to a U.S. port, and the case involves conduct occurring within maritime jurisdiction. What the public sees as silence is often the sound of detailed, methodical work happening behind the scenes. Yet the limited information that has emerged through court documents, witness interviews, and reporting reveals several elements that may be central to the investigation: signs of asphyxiation, potential staging, and CCTV patterns that could outline a circumstantial but compelling narrative. If the CCTV timeline confirms that only 2 individuals entered the cabin during the relevant window, and only 1 left, investigators may view this as significant supporting evidence, especially if that timeline aligns with the recorded time of death reported by the medical examiner. Circumstantial evidence does not mean weak evidence. Many federal cases, including maritime incidents and in-cabin events on ships or aircraft, rely heavily on circumstantial components because there are no eyewitnesses. When combined with forensic findings, digital timelines, and statements from individuals with direct knowledge, circumstantial evidence can form the backbone of a strong prosecution. If the investigation ultimately supports the theory that Anna's passing resulted from intentional pressure, restraint, or a struggle that escalated, federal law provides for charges ranging from second degree to first degree. The distinction often hinges on the presence of intent, planning, or extreme disregard for human life. The FBI's silence may therefore signal not uncertainty, but preparation. A charging decision cannot be made lightly, especially when a juvenile's legal future is at stake. Yet even with this procedural focus, the silence carries a deeper meaning. This case is not merely about what happened inside cabin 8237. It is intertwined with 15 years of family instability, 3 marriages marked by conflict, children moving between homes, warnings raised but not resolved, and tension simmering beneath the surface. The tragedy at sea did not occur in isolation. It unfolded at the end of a long sequence of emotional pressure points, unaddressed concerns, and complex blended family dynamics. As one investigator might frame it, cabins do not create outcomes. Families, environments, histories, and reactions do. And so this chapter ends with the most haunting reconstruction of the timeline, a summary that captures both the simplicity and the weight of the evidence. 2 people walked into the cabin. 1 never walked out. The other has remained silent, and until the truth is unlocked, we can only follow what the cameras left behind. All persons are presumed innocent until proven guilty.